At 72, I thought I knew what death looked like. I'd seen it in Korea, watched it take my rose 5 years back, felt it creeping closer with each morning's ache in these old bones. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what started growing in my neck that Tuesday morning in May. What I thought were just pimples became the medical mystery that brought scientists from 3 states to my little corner of Florida. What emerged from beneath my skin made headlines across the country. But the real story, the one that nearly destroyed my family and taught me the hardest lesson about forgiveness I've ever learned. That story starts with betrayal. It starts with the person I trusted most in this world using me like a lab rat. It starts with my granddaughter Emma, and a secret that could have killed us both. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. My name is Harold Mitchell, and if you're expecting some fancy story from a man with a college degree and perfect grammar, you're barking up the wrong tree. I'm a retired postal carrier from Willowbrook, Florida. Population 3,847 on a good day when the snowbirds haven't fled back north. I've got calloused hands, a bad knee from Korea, and a garden that's been my pride and joy since Rose passed 5 years ago. Rose. God, how I miss that woman. 43 years of marriage, and she still managed to surprise me right up until the cancer took her. After the funeral, everyone kept asking what I was going to do with myself. "Harold, you can't just sit around that big old house," they'd say. Well, I showed them. I threw myself into that garden like it was my religion. Rose's Memorial Garden, I called it. 2 acres of the most beautiful flowers you ever did see. Her favorite roses, of course, but also sunflowers, tall as basketball players, and tomatoes that could win county fair ribbons. That garden became my church, my therapy, my reason to get up every morning when the loneliness tried to drag me back under the covers. The only person who understood was Emma, my granddaughter, 24 years old, smart as a whip, and the spitting image of Rose when she was young. After my son died in that car wreck 10 years back, Emma became the light of my life. She was working on some fancy degree at the University of Florida, studying bugs of all things, but she'd drive down every weekend to help with the garden. "Grandpa Harold," she'd say, "you've got magic in these hands." Then she'd laugh that laugh that sounded just like her grandmother's, and for a moment the world felt right again. Emma's stepmother, Maggie, never quite warmed up to me after my son passed. Can't say I blame her much. Grief makes people strange, and we both handled it different. She threw herself into her nursing job at the county hospital, working double shifts like she was running from something. Me? I talked to Rose's roses and pretended she could hear me. Our little town of Willowbrook sits in the heart of Florida farm country, where everybody knows everybody, and your business becomes everyone's business faster than you can say sweet tea. It's the kind of place where neighbors still bring casseroles when someone's sick, and where the biggest excitement usually comes from the annual corn festival. Dr. Sarah Bennett had been our family doctor for 20 years, delivered half the babies in town, and knew every ache and pain in my 72-year-old body. She was the one who told me I had the constitution of a man 20 years younger. "Keep doing whatever you're doing, Harold," she'd say during my yearly checkups. If only I'd known then what was coming. If only I'd paid attention to the sign. It started on a Tuesday morning in May, the kind of morning that makes you grateful to be alive in Florida. The air was sweet with jasmine, and I had big plans for the day. A truck from Henderson's Garden Supply had delivered 20 bags of premium topsoil the day before. Expensive stuff, but Rose always said you can't grow something beautiful in ugly dirt. I'd been eyeing a bare patch near Rose's prize roses, thinking it was time to expand her memorial section. Maybe plant some of those butterfly bushes she always talked about wanting. At 72, I didn't have forever to get things perfect, and that patch had been bothering me all winter. The soil looked rich and dark, almost black, with that earthy smell that promised good things. I spent the morning spreading it thick, working it into the existing dirt with my hands like Rose taught me. "Feel the earth, Harold," she used to say. "Let it tell you what it needs." By lunchtime, my hands were caked with the stuff under my fingernails, ground into the creases of my palms. I cleaned up at the outdoor spigot like always, scrubbing with that harsh pumice soap until my skin felt raw. Nothing unusual there. I'd been getting dirty in gardens for 50 years. That night, I noticed some irritation around my collar line where sweat and soil had mixed. Just looked like heat rash to me. Maybe an allergic reaction to something in the new dirt. I slapped some calamine lotion on it and went to bed thinking nothing more about it. Wednesday morning, the rash had spread. Small red bumps scattered across the left side of my neck like a constellation of angry stars. They itched something fierce, but I've never been one to fuss over minor ailments. Korea taught me to save my complaining for things that actually mattered. I spent another day in the garden, this time planting those butterfly bushes. The bumps seemed to multiply as I worked, but I figured it was just more of the same allergic reaction. Maybe I was getting sensitive in my old age. Wouldn't be the first thing to change about my body without asking permission. Thursday brought Emma for her weekly visit. She pulled into my driveway in that beat-up Honda Civic of hers, music thumping loud enough to wake the neighbors. That girl had more energy than a power plant and twice as much determination. "Grandpa Harold," she called, bouncing out of the car with her usual enthusiasm. "Wait until you see what I brought you. I found this amazing fertilizer recipe in one of my textbooks." But when she got close enough to hug me, her expression changed. Those bright eyes that reminded me so much of Rose went serious, focused on my neck like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Grandpa, what's wrong with your neck?" I touched the area self-consciously. The bumps had gotten bigger, more pronounced. Some of them felt warm to the touch, almost feverish. "Just some kind of rash from that new soil," I said, waving her off. "Nothing an old soldier can't handle." But Emma wasn't having it. She pulled out her phone, these kids, and their phones, and started taking pictures before I could stop her. "Emma, what in the Sam Hill are you doing?" "Research," she said, still snapping photos from different angles. "These don't look like any allergic reaction I've seen. The pattern is too organized." Organized. That was a strange word to use about a rash, but looking in the bathroom mirror that night, I had to admit she had a point. The bumps weren't randomly scattered anymore. They seemed to be arranged in rough lines like tiny soldiers marching across my skin. Friday morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The bumps had darkened from red to a deep purple, and some of them were starting to weep a clear fluid. Worse, they'd spread down my collarbone and up toward my jawline. Time to swallow my pride and see Dr. Bennett. Sarah Bennett had been our family doctor since Emma was in diapers, and she'd seen me through everything from broken ribs to Rose's final days. If anyone could figure out what was happening to me, it was her. "Well, Harold," she said after examining my neck with more attention than it had gotten since Rose used to check me for ticks, "I have to say this is unusual. The pattern suggests contact dermatitis, but the severity and progression are concerning." She prescribed a strong topical steroid and antihistamines, standard treatment for allergic reactions. "Give it a week," she said. "If it doesn't improve, we'll run some tests." But it didn't improve. By Sunday, the bumps had developed small, dark centers like tiny volcanoes getting ready to erupt. The itching had turned to burning, and I was starting to feel run down in a way that had nothing to do with my age. Emma came by that afternoon and took one look at me before marching straight to the phone to call Dr. Bennett's emergency line. While we waited for the callback, she paced around my kitchen like a caged animal, muttering things under her breath that sounded suspiciously like scientific terminology. "Emma, Sit down. You're making me nervous. Grandpa, when exactly did you first notice the bumps? I told her about Tuesday morning, the new soil, the progression through the week. She pulled out a notebook. Where had that come from? And started scribbling notes like she was documenting evidence for a court case. What kind of soil was it? Where did it come from? Did Henderson mention anything unusual about this particular batch? The questions came rapid fire, and something in her tone made me uncomfortable. This wasn't casual concern anymore. This felt professional, clinical, like I was a specimen under a microscope instead of her grandfather, Doctor. Bennett called back within the hour and told us to meet her at the emergency room. The bumps on my neck had started to change color again, this time developing an odd, iridescent quality that made them look almost metallic in certain lights. As Emma drove me to the hospital, I caught her staring at my neck in the rearview mirror with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't just worry, it was fascination, like she was watching something remarkable unfold. "Emma, what aren't you telling me?" She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Nothing, Grandpa. I just want to make sure you're okay." But something in her voice told me that wasn't the whole truth. And as we pulled into the emergency room parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that my granddaughter knew more about what was happening to me than she was letting on. The emergency room at Willowbrook General was buzzing with the usual Sunday evening chaos, crying babies, teenagers with sports injuries, and the familiar smell of disinfectant that always reminded me of Rose's last days. Dr. Bennett met us at triage, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of genuine concern. "Harold, I need you to be completely honest with me," she said, pulling on latex gloves. "Have you been anywhere unusual? Eaten anything different? Used any new medications or supplements?" I ran through my boring routine for the third time that day, while she examined my neck under the harsh fluorescent lights. The bumps had continued to evolve, developing what looked like tiny dark spots at their centers. When she pressed gently on one of them, a small amount of clear fluid leaked out. "I'm going to be straight with you," Dr. Bennett said, stepping back. "I've been practicing medicine for 25 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. The pattern, the progression, the coloration, it's not matching any standard dermatological condition I know." Emma leaned forward in her chair. "What about parasitic infections? I've read about cases where—" "Emma," I interrupted, "let the doctor do her job." But Dr. Bennett looked interested. "Actually, that's not a bad thought. Harold, have you traveled anywhere tropical recently? Been exposed to any standing water or unusual insects?" I shook my head. The most exotic place I'd been was the Piggly Wiggly in town, and that was stretching the definition of exotic. "I'm going to order some blood work and take a few photographs for consultation," Dr. Bennett continued. "In the meantime, I want to try a different approach to treatment. These look like they might be some kind of bite or sting reaction, even though you don't remember being bitten." She prescribed a stronger antihistamine and a course of oral antibiotics, just in case there was a secondary bacterial infection. "Give this 48 hours. If there's no improvement, I'm referring you to a dermatologist in Gainesville." As we left the hospital, Emma was unusually quiet. She helped me into the passenger seat of her car with the kind of careful attention you'd give a piece of fragile china. "You don't have to treat me like I'm dying," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "I know, Grandpa, I just—" She started the car and sat there for a moment staring at the steering wheel. "I just wish I knew more about skin conditions. Maybe I could help." Something about the way she said it bothered me, but I was too tired and uncomfortable to press the issue. The burning sensation in my neck had intensified, and I was starting to feel feverish. Monday morning brought no relief. If anything, the bumps looked worse, larger, darker, and arranged in an even more distinct pattern that reminded me uncomfortably of crop circles I'd seen on those UFO documentaries. The thought was ridiculous, but there was definitely something unnatural about the way they were organized. Emma showed up at my door at 8 a.m. sharp, earlier than usual for her visits. She had her notebook again and what looked like a magnifying glass. "Grandpa, I know this might sound strange, but would you mind if I took a closer look at your neck? I've been reading some research papers and I think I might have some insights." "Research papers? Emma, you study bugs, not skin diseases." "Actually, there's more overlap than you'd think," she said, already pulling out her magnifying glass. "Dermatological reactions, parasitic infections, insect-related conditions, they're all connected." I let her examine me, mainly because she seemed so determined and I was desperate for answers. Under the magnifying glass, she spent a long time looking at each individual bump, occasionally making notes or taking more photos with her phone. "Grandpa," she said finally, her voice careful and controlled, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me. Have you noticed any movement?" "Movement? What kind of movement?" "In the affected area. Any sensation of things shifting or crawling?" The question sent a chill down my spine, partly because it was so odd, and partly because now that she mentioned it, I had felt something like that. Especially at night, lying in bed, there were moments when it felt like something was stirring just beneath the surface of my skin. "Maybe," I admitted reluctantly. "Sometimes at night, it feels like, well, like something's moving around under there. But that's probably just my imagination, right? Just the inflammation causing weird sensations?" Emma's face went pale. She closed her notebook with a sharp snap and stood up abruptly. "I need to make some phone calls," she said. "Grandpa, I want you to promise me something." "Don't touch the affected area more than you have to. Don't squeeze or pick at the bumps. And if anything changes, anything at all, you call me immediately." "Emma, you're scaring me." "What do you think this is?" "I'm probably wrong," she said, but her eyes told a different story. "I just want to be thorough. I'm going to talk to my professor, see if he has any ideas." After she left, I spent the day trying to distract myself with television and light housework, but my attention kept drifting to my neck. The sensation of movement was becoming more pronounced, especially when I was still. It felt like tiny bubbles shifting around just beneath my skin. That evening, I was watching the news when I felt something different. Not just movement, but a kind of rhythmic pulsing, like a second heartbeat emanating from the largest bump near my collarbone. I pressed gently on the area and felt something that made my blood run cold. It pushed back. I rushed to the bathroom mirror and examined the spot under the bright vanity lights. The dark center of the bump was larger now, and as I watched, it seemed to dilate and contract slightly, like a tiny breathing hole. My hands were shaking as I called Emma's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Emma, it's Grandpa. Something's happening. These things in my neck, they're moving, really moving. I can see it happening. Call me back as soon as you get this." I tried calling again an hour later, then again at midnight. No answer. It wasn't like Emma to ignore my calls, especially after she'd been so concerned earlier. Unable to sleep, I spent the night in my recliner, checking my neck every few minutes in the mirror on the side table. The movement was becoming more obvious, more coordinated. Whatever was under my skin was getting stronger, more active. Tuesday morning brought a horrifying discovery. When I woke up, the largest bump had developed what looked like a small opening at its center. Not just the dark spot I'd seen before, but an actual hole. And from that hole, something small and dark was protruding. I fumbled for my phone and called Emma again. This time she answered on the first ring. "Grandpa? Are you okay?" "Emma, you need to get over here right now. Something is coming out of my neck." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I'm on my way," she said finally. "Don't panic. And whatever you do, don't try to remove anything yourself. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I waited for her, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, watching in fascinated horror as more small, dark objects began to emerge from other bumps on my neck. They looked organic, almost like tiny seeds or pods, but they moved with purpose. When Emma arrived, she took one look at me, and her face went white as a sheet. But what disturbed me most was that she didn't look surprised. She looked guilty. Emma stood in my doorway for what felt like an eternity, staring at my neck with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't shock or horror, it was recognition. And that terrified me more than anything that had been happening to my body. "You know what this is?" I said. It wasn't a question. She closed the door behind her and set down a bag I hadn't noticed before. A professional-looking case that definitely wasn't her usual purse. "Grandpa, I need you to sit down. We need to talk." "Talk about what?" "About these things crawling out of my neck? About why you're not surprised to see them?" Emma pulled out her phone and started taking more pictures, documenting the small dark objects that were now clearly visible emerging from several of the bumps. Under the morning light, they looked like tiny beetles or larvae, each about the size of a rice grain. "First, I need to collect samples," she said, opening her case to reveal what looked like medical instruments and specimen containers. "Then I'll explain everything." "Samples? Emma, what the hell is going on?" But she was already pulling on latex gloves with practiced efficiency. "Grandpa, these appear to be some kind of parasitic insect larvae. They've been incubating under your skin for the past week, and now they're ready to emerge." The clinical way she said it made my stomach turn. "How do you know that? And why do you have all this equipment?" Emma carefully extracted one of the emerging larvae with tweezers and placed it in a specimen jar. The thing was definitely alive, writhing slightly in the container. "Because I've seen this before. Not exactly this, but similar cases. There are species of parasitic insects that use mammals as hosts for their larvae." "Species you study?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Among other things." I grabbed her wrist to stop her from collecting another specimen. "Emma, look at me. How long have you known what this was?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, she set down her tweezers and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Since Sunday," she whispered. "Maybe Saturday. I suspected it when I first saw the pattern, but I wasn't sure until you mentioned the movement." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "You've known for 3 days? While I've been terrified, thinking I was dying of some horrible disease, you've known what was wrong with me?" "Grandpa, it's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." I stood up so fast my head spun. "Your own grandfather is being eaten alive by bugs, and you decide to keep it a secret?" Emma was crying now, big tears streaming down her face. "I had to be sure. I had to document everything." "If I'm right about what species this is, it could change everything we know about parasitic insects in North America." "I don't give a damn about your research. I care about getting these things out of me." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's not... Grandpa, you don't understand. This isn't just about research. If these are what I think they are, this could be the discovery of a lifetime. A new species, completely undocumented, with behavioral patterns we've never seen before." I stared at my granddaughter, this young woman I'd raised from a baby, who'd sat on my knee while I read her bedtime stories, who'd helped me plant Rose's memorial garden, and realized I didn't know her at all. "So I'm what, your test subject? Your grandfather the lab rat?" "No. God, no, it's not like that." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "I love you, Grandpa. I would never hurt you intentionally. But this discovery, it could help so many people." "If we can understand how these insects work, how they reproduce, we might be able to prevent future infestations." "Future infestations? How many other people have these things?" Emma's silence was answer enough. I sank back into my chair, feeling suddenly old and tired and incredibly foolish. There are others, I said. It wasn't a question. Professor Crawford has been tracking reports of similar cases across the Southeast for the past 6 months. Unexplained skin conditions, always associated with new soil shipments from the same distributor. We've been trying to identify the vector, the way these insects are spreading. The way they're spreading. Emma, listen to yourself. You're talking about people, not statistics. She knelt beside my chair, her professional demeanor cracking. I know, Grandpa. I know how this sounds. But if we don't study this properly, if we don't understand what we're dealing with, it could spread everywhere. There could be thousands of cases. I touched the side of my neck, feeling the small wounds where the larvae had emerged. How do I get rid of them? That's complicated. The larvae need to fully emerge before we can treat the infection sites. If we try to remove them prematurely, parts might break off and cause serious complications. How long? Based on what I've observed, probably another day or 2, maybe 3. Another day or 2 of having bugs crawl out of my skin while my own granddaughter treated me like a science experiment. I'd survived Korea, buried my son and my wife, lived through more heartbreak than most people could imagine, but this felt like the final straw. I want you to leave, I said quietly. Grandpa, I want you to leave my house. Take your specimen jars and your research and get out. Emma's face crumpled. Please don't do this. I know you're angry, but I can help you through this. I know more about these insects than anyone. That's the problem, isn't it? You've known all along and you chose your research over your family. She gathered her equipment slowly, like she was hoping I'd change my mind. At the door, she turned back one more time. Grandpa, I need you to know that I called Professor Crawford yesterday. He's contacted the CDC and several other specialists. Help is coming. Help for me, or help for your research project? The question hung in the air between us as she left, and I locked the door behind her. I spent the rest of Tuesday alone, watching in horrified fascination as more larvae emerged from my neck. They dropped onto my shirt, onto the floor, tiny dark things that moved with surprising speed once they were free. I collected them in mason jars, not for science, but because the thought of them crawling around my house was unbearable. Maggie called that evening, having heard from Emma about our fight. Harold, you need to stop being stubborn and let that girl help you, she said. Whatever's wrong between you two, this isn't the time for family drama. Family drama? Maggie, she's been using me as a test subject. She's been trying to help you, and from what she told me, this thing you've got could be serious if it spreads. I looked down at the 3 mason jars on my coffee table, each containing a half-dozen of the dark larvae. It's already spread. The question is, how far? All the more reason to work with Emma and her professor, don't you think? After I hung up, I sat in Rose's old recliner, staring at those jars and thinking about trust and family and the different ways people show love. Emma thought she was protecting me by documenting everything, making sure my case contributed to something bigger than just one old man's suffering. But all I felt was betrayed, used, and desperately alone with something growing under my skin that my own granddaughter had known about and hidden from me. Outside, I could hear cars pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I saw official-looking vehicles and people in what looked like hazmat suits. Emma's help had arrived, whether I wanted it or not. The knock on my door came at 7:30 that evening, firm and official. Through the peephole, I could see a woman in a dark suit, flanked by 2 men in what looked like environmental protection gear. Behind them, more vehicles had arrived. Official-looking SUVs with government plates, and a van that screamed Federal Agency. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Patricia Wells from the Centers for Disease Control. We need to speak with you about your medical condition. I opened the door, still wearing the same clothes I'd had on all day. stained now with the clear fluid that continued to seep from the emergent sites on my neck. Dr. Wells tried not to stare, but I could see her cataloging every detail of my appearance with professional interest. "Your granddaughter contacted us through her university," she continued. "We understand you may be dealing with an unusual parasitic infestation." "That's one way to put it," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Though I'm guessing you know more about what's happening to me than I do." The team that entered my living room transformed my quiet house into something resembling a field laboratory. They set up equipment I couldn't begin to identify, took photographs of everything, and treated my 3 mason jars of larvae like they'd discovered buried treasure. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to be direct with you," Dr. Wells said, settling into Rose's old chair while her team worked around us. "This is the 14th confirmed case we've documented in the past 6 months. All victims purchased soil from the same distributor, Henderson's Garden Supply, and all presented with identical symptoms and progression. 14. The number hit me like a punch to the gut. Are the others okay?" "The prognosis is generally good with proper treatment, but we've had complications in 3 cases where the patients attempted to remove the larvae prematurely." She glanced at the bandages around my neck. "Your granddaughter's documentation has been invaluable in understanding the life cycle and emergence patterns." I felt a stab of guilt about sending Emma away, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. "So this has been going on for 6 months and nobody thought to warn people? To recall the contaminated soil? It's not that simple. Until we had enough cases to establish a pattern, it looked like isolated incidents of unusual allergic reactions. The soil company has been cooperative, but tracing the contamination source has been challenging." One of her team members, a young man with kind eyes behind thick glasses, approached with a specimen container. "Sir, I know this is difficult, but we need to collect samples of the emerging larvae. The more we understand about their development, the better we can treat current cases and prevent future ones." As they worked, I learned more about what was happening to my body than Emma had ever told me. The larvae were from a species of parasitic fly that typically used deer and other large mammals as hosts. Something in the soil, likely contamination from a processing facility, had introduced the eggs into the garden supply chain. "The good news," Dr. Wells explained as her team carefully extracted several more larvae from my neck, "is that these insects don't reproduce inside human hosts. Once all the larvae emerge and the sites heal, you should be completely free of infection." "And the bad news? The emergence process can take several more days, and there's always risk of secondary bacterial infection if the wounds aren't properly cared for." They were professional and thorough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being treated more like a case study than a person. Every larvae they collected went into labeled containers. Every photograph they took was cataloged and filed. Every symptom I described was recorded and cross-referenced. "Dr. Wells, can I ask you something?" I said, as her team began packing up their equipment. "How did you know to look for this? I mean, how does a case of bugs in an old man's garden become a federal investigation?" She smiled for the first time since arriving. "Your granddaughter, actually. She contacted her professor when she first suspected what you were dealing with. Professor Crawford had been corresponding with us about similar cases, so when Emma sent him photographs and documentation, he forwarded everything to our office immediately. She knew it was important. More than important, her careful documentation of your case has provided us with the most complete picture we have of the larvae's development cycle. Without her work, we might still be treating this as a series of unrelated dermatological conditions." After the CDC team left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the aftermath of their visit. Business cards, information pamphlets, medication instructions, and a follow-up appointment schedule. My quiet house felt too big and too empty. I picked up my phone 3 times to call Emma before finally dialing her number. "Grandpa?" She answered on the first ring, her voice thick with tears and exhaustion. "I owe you an apology," I said. "No, you don't. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I should have put you first instead of—" "Emma, listen to me. The CDC was just here. They told me about the other cases, about your documentation, about how your work might help other people going through this." There was silence on the other end of the line. "I was scared and angry, and I took it out on you," I continued. "But what you did, keeping track of everything, getting the right people involved, that took courage. I still should have told you. Maybe. But you're young and you're passionate about your work, and sometimes that means making hard choices." "I know something about that. Grandpa, are you okay? What did the CDC say about treatment?" I looked down at my neck, where fresh bandages covered the emergent sites. "They say I'll be fine. A few more days of this, then healing time, and I should be good as new." "I want to come over. I want to help take care of you." "I'd like that," I said. "But Emma, next time something like this happens, and God willing there won't be a next time, you tell your old grandfather the truth from the start, okay?" "I promise." 20 minutes later, she was at my door with Chinese takeout and a bag of medical supplies the CDC had recommended. As she carefully cleaned and rebandaged my wounds, I watched her face in the lamplight and saw Rose's determination mixed with her father's gentle hands. "You know," I said as she worked, "your grandmother would have been proud of you. She always said you were going to do important things with your life." Emma's hands stilled for a moment. "I don't feel very important right now. I feel like I hurt the person I love most in the world. You did what you thought was right. That's all any of us can do." That night, she slept on the couch, insisting on staying in case I needed help during the night. I lay in bed listening to her quiet breathing and thinking about forgiveness and family and the different ways people show love. By morning, 3 more larvae had emerged, and Emma was there to help me deal with them. Not as a researcher this time, but as my granddaughter. The 4th day after the CDC visit started like all the others had, with Emma gently waking me to check my bandages and document any new developments. But when I looked in the mirror that Thursday morning, something was terribly wrong. The emergent sites weren't healing. If anything, they looked worse, angry, inflamed, with a sickly yellow discharge that hadn't been there the night before. The skin around each wound had taken on a mottled, grayish color that reminded me of gangrene I'd seen during my Army days. "Grandpa, we need to get you to the hospital right now," Emma said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The drive to Willowbrook General felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every bump in the road sent waves of pain through my neck and shoulder, and I was starting to feel feverish in a way that had nothing to do with the Florida heat. Dr. Bennett took one look at me and immediately called for blood work and cultures. "Harold, I'm seeing signs of a serious secondary infection. This is exactly what the CDC warned us about." While we waited for test results, Emma paced the hallway outside my room like a caged animal. Through the open door, I could hear her on the phone with Professor Crawford, her voice growing more agitated with each passing minute. "No, the antibiotics aren't working. Yes, I documented everything. How long before you can get here?" When she came back into the room, her face was pale and drawn. "Grandpa, Professor Crawford is driving down from Gainesville. He's bringing a specialist from the CDC who's been working on treatment protocols." "Treatment protocols? I thought they said the emergence process was almost over." Emma sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. "It should be. But sometimes there are complications. Sometimes not all the larvae emerge properly, or pieces get left behind, or the host develops an immune response that makes things worse." The way she said host instead of patient or person told me everything I needed to know about how bad this was getting. I was becoming a case study again, not her grandfather. The blood work came back showing dangerous levels of infection markers, and my white cell count was through the roof. Dr. Bennett started me on intravenous antibiotics and pain medication, but I could tell from her expression that she was worried. "The infection is spreading faster than we expected," she told Emma quietly, probably thinking the medication had made me drowsy enough not to hear. "If we can't get it under control in the next 24 hours, we're looking at potential sepsis." Sepsis. I'd seen men die from sepsis in Korea, blood poisoning that shut down your organs one by one until there was nothing left to fight with. The word hung in the sterile hospital air like a death sentence. Professor Crawford arrived that evening with Dr. Wells and another specialist I didn't recognize. They huddled around my bedside like generals planning a battle, speaking in medical terminology that might as well have been a foreign language. "The inflammatory response is more severe than we've seen in previous cases," the new specialist was saying. "It's possible that Mr. Mitchell's age and immune system status are contributing factors." "Or," Emma interjected, and I could hear the guilt in her voice, "the delay in proper treatment while I was documenting symptoms may have allowed the infestation to progress beyond the typical parameters." "Emma, that's not—" Professor Crawford started. "It is my fault," she said firmly. "I prioritized research over patient care, and now my grandfather is paying the price." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her she'd done her best, but the pain medication was making it hard to focus on anything except the burning sensation that seemed to be spreading from my neck down into my chest and back. By midnight, my fever had spiked to 103 degrees, and the infection markers in my blood work had gotten worse despite the antibiotics. Dr. Bennett was talking about transferring me to a larger hospital in Gainesville, one better equipped to handle complicated cases. "I'm not leaving Willowbrook," I told them when they presented the transfer papers. "If I'm going to die from bug bites, I'm going to do it in my own hometown." "Grandpa, don't talk like that," Emma said, but her voice was thick with tears. "You're not going to die. We're going to figure this out." But I could see it in all their faces, the doctors, the specialists, even Emma. They were running out of options, and everybody knew it. That night was the longest of my life. The pain had become constant, a burning ache that no amount of medication seemed to touch. Every few hours, nurses came to check my temperature, my blood pressure, my oxygen levels, all of which seemed to be heading in the wrong direction. Emma never left my side. She held my hand while I drifted in and out of consciousness, and when I was lucid enough to focus, I could see her lips moving in what looked like prayer. My granddaughter, the scientist who studied facts and evidence and documentation, was praying for a miracle. Friday morning brought the worst news yet. The infection had spread to my bloodstream, and despite aggressive antibiotic treatment, my body wasn't responding. Dr. Wells pulled Emma aside for a conversation I was supposed to be too medicated to hear. "We need to discuss the possibility that this case may not have a positive outcome," she said gently. "The infection has progressed beyond what we've seen in other patients, and Mr. Mitchell's advanced age is working against him." Emma's sob cut through the medical jargon like a knife. "There has to be something else we can try. Some experimental treatment, something—" "There is one option," Dr. Wells said after a long pause. "It's extremely risky, and it's never been tried in humans. Only in laboratory animals." "What kind of option?" "Surgical removal of the affected tissue. Essentially, we would need to excise all the infected areas and hope that we can remove enough of the contaminated tissue to allow his immune system to recover." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Emma asked the question I was dreading. "What are the survival odds? Honestly, maybe 30%. And even if he survives, there would be significant scarring and possible nerve damage." I listened to my granddaughter crying softly in the hallway and thought about Rose, about the garden we'd planted together, about all the people I'd loved and lost over 7 decades of living. Maybe it was time to stop fighting and accept that some battles can't be won. But then I thought about Emma, about the guilt she was carrying, about how she'd blame herself for the rest of her life if I died on her watch. And I thought about the other 13 people who'd been through this same nightmare, and the hundreds more who might face it in the future if we didn't find answers. When Emma came back into the room, her eyes red from crying, I reached for her hand with what little strength I had left. "Tell them to do the surgery," I said. "Grandpa, no, the risks. Tell them to do the surgery, and tell them to document everything. If I don't make it, at least maybe my case will help the next poor soul who ends up with bugs in his neck." She squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. "You're going to make it. You have to." But looking at the monitors around my bed, listening to the increasingly urgent beeping of machines that were keeping track of my failing body, I wasn't so sure. The surgery was scheduled for Saturday morning, which meant I had one night to make peace with the possibility that I might not wake up. Emma sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand and trying to pretend she wasn't terrified, while Maggie bustled around organizing things that didn't need organizing, a nervous habit she'd developed since my son died. "There's something I need to tell you both," I said when the pain medication was working well enough for me to think clearly. "Something about Emma's research that you need to understand." Emma looked up sharply. "Grandpa, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. Maggie, you've been angry at Emma for keeping secrets, for putting research before family. But what you don't know is why she was so determined to document everything." I shifted in the hospital bed, wincing as the movement pulled at the infected areas on my neck. "Emma, tell Maggie about your condition, the one you haven't told anyone about." Emma's face went white. "How did you—" "I'm not blind, sweetheart. I've watched you taking medications you think I don't notice, seen you having dizzy spells you pretend are just tired moments. And when that CDC doctor mentioned genetic factors, I saw your face. You're not just studying parasitic infections for academic curiosity, are you?" The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Emma looked at Maggie with tears streaming down her face. "I have a genetic immune deficiency," she whispered. "It's rare, and it's progressive, and it makes me vulnerable to exactly the kind of parasitic infections that have been showing up in these soil contamination cases." Maggie's stern expression crumbled. "Emma, why didn't you tell us?" "Because I was scared. Because I wanted to solve the problem before I became the problem. Because I thought if I could understand these infections, document them, help develop treatments, maybe I could save myself and other people like me." I squeezed Emma's hand with what little strength I had. "That's why she was so focused on my case, Maggie. It wasn't just about research or career advancement. She was trying to save her own life." The realization hit Maggie like a physical blow. She sank into the visitor's chair, staring at Emma with a mixture of horror and understanding. "The late-night phone calls with your professor, the obsessive documentation, the specimen collection, you were racing against time." Emma nodded miserably. "The CDC specialist thinks there might be more contaminated soil shipments out there, more cases coming. And people with immune deficiencies like mine, we don't have the luxury of waiting for standard treatment protocols to be developed." "So when you recognized what was happening to Grandpa Harold, you saw an opportunity to gather data that might save your own life," Maggie said, not accusingly, but with dawning comprehension. "And the lives of other people with similar conditions," Emma added. "There are support groups online, people with immune deficiencies who are terrified of exactly this kind of situation. If we can understand how these parasites work, how they respond to different treatments, we might be able to develop preventive measures." I looked at both women, my daughter-in-law and my granddaughter, both trying to process this revelation while I lay dying from the very thing Emma had been trying to understand. "There's more," Emma said quietly. "The experimental surgery they want to do on you. It's based on a treatment protocol that Professor Crawford and I developed specifically for patients with compromised immune systems. We've tested it in laboratory settings, but never on humans." The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. "So I'm not just a patient. I'm the first human trial for a treatment that might save your life." Emma broke down completely then, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear. "I'm so sorry, Grandpa. I never meant for it to happen this way. I never meant for you to get hurt because of my research." "Emma, listen to me." I waited until she looked up, her face red and swollen with tears. "I've lived 72 years. I've buried my wife, my son, seen more heartbreak than most people could imagine. But you're 24 years old, and you're brilliant, and you have so much life ahead of you. But I used you. I treated you like a test subject instead of my grandfather. No, you didn't. You treated me like someone whose case could help save lives, including your own. And if this surgery works, if this treatment protocol you've developed can help other people, then everything I've been through will have been worth it." Maggie wiped her eyes with a hospital tissue. "Emma, honey, why didn't you trust us with this? We're family." "We could have helped. Because I was scared you'd treat me differently. Like I was fragile or dying or already gone. I wanted to be useful, to contribute something meaningful before my condition got worse." "Your condition," I said carefully. "How bad is it?" Emma looked at her hands. "Without treatment, people with my specific variant usually have maybe 5 to 7 years before the immune system fails completely. With current treatments, maybe 10 to 12 years. But if we can understand parasitic infections better, develop more targeted therapies, you could have a normal lifespan," Maggie finished. "Possibly. It's not guaranteed, but it's hope." I thought about everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks. The fear, the anger, the sense of betrayal, the family conflicts. And underneath it all, my granddaughter had been fighting for her life, trying to save herself and others like her while watching her grandfather suffer from the very condition she was studying. "The surgery tomorrow," I said. "If it works, will the treatment protocol be viable for people with your condition?" Emma nodded. "That's the hope. The surgical technique combined with targeted antibiotic therapy and immune system support. It could be a game changer for immune-compromised patients. Then we do it. And if something happens to me, you make sure this research continues. You make sure other people don't have to go through what we've been through." "Grandpa, don't talk like that. The surgery is going to work." But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the knowledge that 30% odds weren't very good when applied to someone you love. As the night wore on and the pre-surgery preparations began, I found myself thinking not about dying, but about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. If my case could help Emma live a longer, healthier life, if it could help other families avoid the nightmare we'd been living through, then maybe these past 2 weeks of horror would have some meaning. Maybe bugs crawling out of an old man's neck could somehow lead to something good. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took hold was Emma squeezing my hand and whispering, "I love you, Grandpa." "Thank you for trusting me." As consciousness slipped away, I found myself hoping that when I woke up, if I woke up, this whole nightmare would finally make sense. I woke up to the sound of Emma crying, which seemed like a bad sign until I realized they were tears of relief, not grief. The surgery had lasted 6 hours, and I'd been unconscious for another 8 while my body decided whether it wanted to keep fighting or give up entirely. The surgery was successful, Dr. Wells told me once I was alert enough to focus on her words. We removed all the infected tissue and found evidence that the experimental treatment protocol is working. Your immune markers are improving, and there's no sign of remaining parasitic material. My neck felt like it had been run over by a truck, and I could tell from the tight sensation that there would be significant scarring. But I was alive, and the constant burning pain that had plagued me for weeks was finally gone. "How do I look?" I asked Emma, trying to inject some humor into the moment. She laughed through her tears. "Like someone who just saved a lot of lives, Grandpa." Over the next few days, as I slowly recovered, the full scope of what my case meant began to emerge. Professor Crawford visited daily, bringing updates on how the treatment protocol was being refined based on what they'd learned from my surgery. "Harold, I want you to understand what your courage has accomplished," he said on my 4th day of recovery. "The surgical technique we used, combined with the targeted antibiotic therapy, has proven effective not just for parasitic infections, but for other immune-compromised conditions as well." Emma, who had barely left my bedside since the surgery, added, "The CDC is already implementing the protocol at hospitals across the Southeast. 3 other patients with cases similar to yours have been treated successfully using what we learned from your surgery." "And your condition?" I asked Emma directly. "How does this help you?" Her smile was the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her in weeks. "The immune system support therapy that helped you recover. It's showing promise for genetic immune deficiencies too. Professor Crawford thinks it could extend my prognosis significantly, maybe even give me a normal lifespan." The physical healing was only part of my recovery. The emotional healing, learning to trust Emma again, helping Maggie understand why Emma had made the choices she did, took longer and required more difficult conversations. "I need you both to understand something," I told them one afternoon when Maggie was visiting. "What Emma did wasn't wrong. It was complicated, and maybe she could have handled some things differently, but her motivations were pure. She was trying to save lives, including her own." Maggie had been struggling with the revelation about Emma's condition and the ethical complexities of what had happened. "I just keep thinking about how scared she must have been, carrying that secret while watching you suffer." "I was terrified," Emma admitted. "Every day I watched Grandpa's condition worsen. I wondered if I was looking at my own future. But I also knew that documenting everything, understanding the progression, was the only way to help other people. The greater good versus family loyalty," I said. "It's an old conflict, and there are no easy answers." What surprised me was how quickly the community of Willowbrook rallied around us once the story became public. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the contaminated soil outbreak and how a local family's courage had led to breakthrough treatments. People who had been avoiding me during the worst of my symptoms now stopped by the hospital with flowers and casseroles. "Funny how people treat you different when you're a hero instead of a victim," I observed to Emma. "You were always a hero, Grandpa." It just took everyone else a while to realize it. 3 weeks after the surgery, I was finally released from the hospital. Emma drove me home to a house that felt both familiar and strange, the same rooms where I'd spent terrifying nights watching bugs emerge from my skin now seemed peaceful and safe again. The first thing I did was walk out to Rose's memorial garden. The contaminated soil had been completely removed and replaced, and Emma had replanted everything with varieties that were supposed to be resistant to parasitic infestations. The roses were blooming again, and the butterfly bushes Rose had always wanted were finally thriving. "She would have been proud of you," I told Emma as we stood among the flowers. "Not just because you helped save lives, but because you made hard choices and stood by them when things got difficult. I almost lost you because of those choices." "No, sweetheart. You almost lost me because of some contaminated soil and bad luck. But you saved me, and a lot of other people because you refused to give up. 6 months later, the Rose Mitchell Research Foundation held its first annual symposium on parasitic infections in immune-compromised patients. The event was held in Willowbrook, bringing scientists and medical professionals from around the country to our little town. Emma, whose health had improved dramatically with the new treatment protocols, presented the keynote address on the ethical complexities of research involving family members. She spoke honestly about the mistakes she'd made, the guilt she'd carried, and the importance of transparency in medical research. "My grandfather taught me that love sometimes means making difficult choices," she told the audience. "But he also taught me that those choices mean nothing if they're not grounded in honesty and respect for the people we claim to love." I sat in the front row, still bearing the scars from my surgery but feeling stronger than I had in years. The foundation was already funding research into 3 other rare conditions, and Emma had been accepted into a doctoral program that would allow her to continue developing treatments for immune deficiencies. At the reception after the symposium, Dr. Wells approached me with a familiar expression, the look of someone who had important news to share. "Harold, I wanted you to know that we've traced the contamination source. The soil processing facility was violating environmental regulations, and they've been shut down permanently. More importantly, we've implemented screening protocols that should prevent future outbreaks." "How many total cases were there?" 43 confirmed cases across 7 states. "All successfully treated using the protocol we developed from your case. No fatalities. Minimal long-term complications. 43 families who didn't have to go through the nightmare we'd experienced. 43 people who would recover completely because Emma had been brave enough to document everything, and I'd been stubborn enough to survive the experimental treatment." That evening, as the symposium guests departed and Willowbrook returned to its normal quiet pace, Emma and I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever regret what happened?" she asked. "All the pain, the fear, the family conflicts?" I touched the scars on my neck, permanent reminders of the worst 2 weeks of my life. "I regret that it took a crisis for us to be completely honest with each other. I regret that you felt like you had to carry your secrets alone. But regret the experience itself? No." "Why not?" "Because it brought us closer together. Because it helped save lives. Because it taught me that love isn't just about protecting the people you care about. Sometimes it's about trusting them to make difficult choices, even when you don't understand those choices at first." Emma leaned against my shoulder, and for a moment we sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Rose would have loved this," she said finally. "The foundation, the research, the way the community came together. She always said good things could come from bad situations if people were willing to look for them. She also would have scolded both of us for being so stubborn," I replied. "But she would have been proud of how we figured it out in the end." As we went inside that night, I realized that the worst experience of my life had become, in many ways, one of the most meaningful. Sometimes God uses our darkest moments to create our brightest tomorrows. And sometimes the people we think have betrayed us are actually the ones working hardest to save us. In the garden Rose and I had planted together, enhanced now by Emma's scientific knowledge and community support, the flowers bloomed more beautifully than ever. It seemed like the perfect metaphor for what had grown from the nightmare we'd survived together, something stronger, more beautiful, and more meaningful than what had been there before. Dear friends, Harold Mitchell's story reminds us that life's most terrifying moments can become our greatest blessings in disguise. At 72, when Harold thought bugs crawling from his neck meant certain death, he discovered something far more precious: the unbreakable bond of family love tested by fire. Like many of us who've raised grandchildren, Harold felt betrayed when Emma kept secrets about his condition. But here's what moved me to tears. Emma wasn't being selfish. This brilliant young woman was fighting for her own life while desperately trying to save her grandfather's. She carried the crushing weight of a genetic condition that could kill her, yet she channeled that fear into research that would save not just Harold, but dozens of other families. The real miracle isn't that Harold survived experimental surgery, it's that this crisis stripped away all pretense and brought 3 generations together in authentic love. When Emma finally revealed her secret illness, when Harold chose forgiveness over bitterness, when they transformed their pain into the Rose Mitchell Research Foundation, they showed us what family legacy truly means. Sometimes our worst days become the foundation for our most meaningful tomorrows, and sometimes the people we think have hurt us are actually fighting the hardest to save us. Questions for reflection. Have you ever discovered that someone you felt betrayed by was actually protecting you in ways you didn't understand? What family crisis ultimately brought your loved ones closer together? Please share your own stories of unexpected family healing in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another grandparent needs to hear today.